For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I am your host, Jade Black, and today I'm talking about the importance of family in my writing, because this is something that comes up rather a lot. One thing I do want to say with this episode is I'm not just talking about blood family here, there is also a big thread on found family, because that is also something that comes up more with some of the determined ones than others. But it's definitely something that is worth a mention in an episode like this. So let's start with talking about siblings, because this is one of those things that I go to pretty much straight away. One of the first things I always want to know is, do you have siblings, and where in the birth order are you when I meet a new character? And this varies a lot with the determined ones. There are a few that don't have siblings, but we're going to talk about the ones that do first. So, one of the ones I've talked about the most in terms of siblings is Haru. He has 3. They are all female. He is the only boy, and he is the youngest by quite a margin. His eldest sisters are twins, and they are 10 years older than him. His other sister is 8 years older than him, so there's quite a big gap there, and he seems to be, I think, quite unique with that. With Haru, it's not a secret that he was his dad's favourite kid. It's not a secret at all, and that did create some tension within the siblings. I mean, one of his elder sisters was sort of alright with that, although she was sort of a favourite as well, so there is that. But also, the two of them were thick as thieves, and she just loved him to bits, so she was like, I will gladly spoil this one is cute. The other two, not really quite so much. That does impact Mr. Nakagami quite a lot, and I think you do see with Haru that there's been some tension there. And also with him having 3 sisters, him having the amount of emotional intelligence he has, makes a lot of sense, really. That's kind of a matter of survival for young little Haru. Especially in a house with his mum has quite a big personality, so there's that too. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum and talk about the eldest sibling, which is Hanzo. He is the eldest of 3. He has a younger brother and a younger sister. His brother is 4 years younger than him. His sister is 6 years younger than him. And he's very, very protective of them. He loves them both to bits. They, as a sibling relationship, they're very tight-knit because of a lot of things that happen that might be classed as spoilers, I don't know, so we're not going to mention them. Hanzo's protective streak does come from them, and Hanzo in general is very protective of those that he loves. Daneth is another one I want to talk about, though he's not a determined one. He's been mentioned a fair bit on this podcast by now, I do believe. He is a middle child of 9 kids, or some dumb shit like that. I'm not exactly sure where he is in the birth order, but I know he has a good number of older and younger siblings, and I'm pretty sure there's at least one set of twins in there somewhere. I mean, you'd expect so with that many kids, to be honest. With Daneth, you can definitely feel he has the sort of annoying point of the older siblings are older enough that he's annoyed he can't do the things that they do. At least when he was a kid, that was a big thing. But he also gets saddled with kind of taking care of the younger ones a bit, even though he's like, well, I'm not that much older than them. And they definitely kill his desire to have kids. But with Daneth, you don't see much of his family. I mean, that might be because he's not a POV main. I don't know that I'll class him really as a main character in any of the Determined Ones books. In the Eyes of the Desert, maybe, but so that might have something to do with not seeing so much of that. But again, it felt it was worth a mention. I is a slightly weird one in the sense that he is technically a middle child, but also kind of not really. Because I grew up with just the one older brother, Shinzo, who is not a good man at all. And it was just the two of them for a long time. They hated each other. There's like just absolutely no love between them at all. And then a lot later on, I does also get a younger brother. When I say a lot later on, this other brother is 19 years younger than him. So technically speaking, I is a middle child, but he doesn't really see it that way. Another one that's maybe has a slightly different situation with siblings is Koni. He has a half sibling in his sister Mayumi. There's 3 years between them, and for a long time they were close, but by the time Pensman rolls around, yeah, no, not anymore. And when it comes to the half part of the sibling thing there, they didn't know that for a long time. I suspect she probably still doesn't necessarily know that. They're connected via their mother, not their father. I can tell you that much without spoilers. I did want to touch on Blood Family a little bit while we're on the sibling topic. This is something I'll be doing throughout the episode. Because I and Daneth, with the relationship they have, with Daneth not really having any relationship with his family, and I definitely has no relationship with his brother, they've sort of found each other to be somewhat the brother they wish they had had growing up. There's very much that sort of, I don't know if camaraderie is the right word, but there's that sort of feel for them. It's not something that I think they'd ever say to each other, but there's a mutual understanding. So moving away from siblings, let's talk about parents. Yes, there are characters of mine who have parents. A bit shocking, I know. There are actually quite a lot of them. Ai has both of his parents still alive for the entirety of Black Executioner. Not that he has much relationship with them either. With his mum, that's just because she's not a nice woman at all. His dad wasn't really around much when he was a kid, so I mean that's the main factor there. He does want to have more of a connection with his dad, but life makes that very hard. His dad, his location at any given time is kind of a mystery, so how do you really get in contact with someone like that? Curtis, for In the Eyes of the Desert, that point in the timeline, he has both of his parents as well. There's not really a whole lot of love there either. They're not fans of his. He's not a fan of theirs. There's a very big ideological difference between them. And there's also expectations and all of those sorts of wondrous things. I mean, that can be bad enough for most families, as you know, everybody's aware. But add in the whole royal duty on top of that, and yeah, nobody's really having a great time there. Kurisu is a weird one in the sense that she does have both of her parents, but also kind of not really. So, for those that aren't aware, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, Kurisu is Ai's daughter, so she has him, and they have a pretty decent relationship for the most part. Kurisu and her mother, like, her mother is not dead. Like, that's not a thing. But they don't really have much relationship. They don't talk to each other or anything. So it's sort of like, well, yes, she's around, but does it count? I don't know. I mean, I don't know that either of them have much of a desire to make that relationship. I mean, the mother clearly doesn't, but whether Kurisu seeks that connection or not, I very highly doubt it, but I can't say for certain without having spent more time with Kurisu, and she's a bit scary. When it comes to Haru, I have mentioned his mother. Unfortunately, she's not really around much anymore. His dad, he does have a very good relationship with, though. They are thick as thieves. Atsushi just loves him to bits. They are quite similar in a lot of ways. They're both very soft and small and very sweet men. I mean, one thing that should probably be mentioned is Haru is not taller than his dad. His dad is 5'2", Haru is 5'0". He never earned that badge of honor. Other characters I feel it's worth a mention with parents, Koni and Hanzo for sure, because Koni and Hanzo both did end up being raised by parents, but they're all unfortunately dead. Well, maybe not so unfortunately with Koni. Koni never really knew his mother. She died when he was like 2 or 3, very, very young. His father died a lot later, but I don't think you can really say Koni was raised by his dad, let's put it that way. Hanzo, however, does vividly remember the deaths of both his parents. His mother died in childbirth with his youngest sibling, so there were a lot of big feelings at that point in Hanzo's life, and his dad died when Hanzo was 16. While they did have that there, at the same time, I mean, particularly with Koni, I don't think he really knows what a parent relationship feels like. Helga is one I feel is worth a mention on this subject as well, because obviously she does have blood parents. But in South Fjordvik it just doesn't really matter. Family doesn't work the same way. Blood family just doesn't really have anything tied to it in South Fjordvik. You're kind of born and raised in more of a community environment, but at the same time, not. It's not actually a community, it's more the sense that when you get to a certain very young age, depending on where and how you're born and all of those sorts of things, you sort of end up with a status at birth. Basically, depending on who your blood parents are, potentially. If they're a notable person, that means something for the kid. If they're not, then it doesn't. And so when the kid is a very young age, they're sort of put into a stream of what they'd be good at. So whether that be, okay, you should be a soldier, you should be in this particular sector, such as, I don't know, logging or something like that. That's decided generally pretty young, and it can be fluid if, things happen, such as, the kid loses an arm, then it's like, okay, well, maybe being a soldier isn't the thing for you, maybe we can find a different place for you. Or the kid is proven to be, really smart, then generally the South Fieldians don't really like that for soldiers. There might be a gap in sort of the senior levels of the military think, okay, actually maybe you're better suited for a role like that, but generally those kids will be more likely put in government and then actually given any amount of education, because they don't like the soldiers to be educated, they don't really want them to know much, because then they talk back and they don't really do their job in the same way, at least in the South Fjordovan ideological way. They're not a fan of that. So while Helga has parents, it doesn't matter. She doesn't know who they are, she doesn't care. They probably don't really know who she is or care. When it comes to found family, this is a little bit thin, but Hanzo and Yoru do have a little bit of a father-son thing going, but it's more of a mentor-mentee thing. It does just stretch a little bit beyond that sometimes, but as I said, it is a little bit tenuous. It felt worth a mention. Right, let's now move on from the parents track, let's move on to kids, because there are characters with kids. Ai Nagashima is one I mentioned earlier. He has the one kid in Kurisu, and they do have a good relationship for the most part. he didn't know he was a dad for a while because, I mean, I think it's not really a secret, but the mother there is like not. She's not a good person. She's not. She didn't tell him for. I mean, there's an argument for noble reasons because, you know, the middle of a war and all that and distraction, but at the same time, that is your husband. I think you should tell him. Other characters that have kids, because I don't want to keep on eye too much, I did really mention most of the deal there, though really, maybe it's worth a mention that ideally he would have had to. He did want another kid, and then that just didn't happen in the end. Let's talk about Toru, who has 3 kids. They are all boys. And relationships with them were a little bit tough. I mean, his middle kid is definitely his favourite. I don't know how much of that is a secret between him and the parents. His eldest kid, he really wishes he could have been around a bit more to make sure that kid turned out better. It's a bit of a bittersweet thing for him because he's like, on the one hand, I do love a lot about this kid, but at the same time, he kind of turned out like a bit of an arse, and it gets harder to reform that as people get older. His youngest kid, I don't think there's really anything I can say without spoilers. And when I say Toru has 3 kids, those are the ones I know about. I'm not convinced there aren't more. I mean, there's a very high chance that he has one more, whether there is another one on top of that. It's not impossible. Let's talk about someone who does definitely have more kids. That is Atsushi, that's Haru's dad. He has 4. He loves Haru, great relationship there. The other kids, not so much. I mean, the twins, the eldest 2, the one he has a good relationship with. The other, not really, but she is difficult. There is a sort of thought between him and his wife that, you know, all the niceness went into the one, those 2 twins. And the sort of middle child there, the one who's 8 years older than Haru, he doesn't. I guess their relationship is best described as tempestuous. Because there are moments where they really do get along and really have a lot of love for each other, and then there are moments where they butt heads and it gets honestly really quite ugly. And as time goes on, their relationship does get worse. And I don't know whether that will stay forever, because Atsushi really does. You know, he's a sweet bean. He wants to have those relationships with all of his kids, ideally. I mean, I think he accepts that the oldest one, that's not really going to happen. I think he does get to a point where he accepts that, especially when, you know, things fractured when, like, quite a long time ago. But with the one in the middle, he really does want that connection with her. He's aware that really she does need it. She just doesn't necessarily think she does. I feel another character that's worth mentioning on the children front is Hanzo, because he does want kids. Like, even with all the difficulties surrounding, at some points, having to, you know, raise his siblings a bit, that hasn't killed his desire for kids. If anything, I think that kind of made him want kids more, bizarrely. But that is definitely something that he wants. I think ideally he'd have 4 or something, but Hunter doesn't like to make things easy on himself. Sliding over to the found family thread on kids, this isn't really much of a thing, I don't feel. Atsushi does have a tendency to unofficially adopt kids when he sees people who don't have strong parental relationships. He'll just be like, okay, I'll have you. You can come with me. I mean, again, this isn't ever something that he says or anything like that. it's just one of those sort of semi-subconscious things. Not always, sometimes he does make a more conscious decision about that. There is one very notable example of that. I don't really want to say because spoilers for a future project, I think. And I think there is a bit of a running joke between him and his wife about when he comes home at the end of the day, she's like, okay, how many more kids did you adopt for us? She does love him. She really does, but opposites attract on that one, I think. And another character I have mentioned a few times is Womo on this one. He's not a father, and he never wanted to be, but there are a couple of people he meets where they end up to him sort of being the kids he never knew he wanted. I don't think I can say anything more about that without spoilers, so let's just move on. Let's move on to the people that don't have family, because this isn't necessarily so much of a thing for the determined ones, but later in the timeline, there are definitely more characters who don't really have family. So, as good example as any to go with is Shinichi. Fuck knows where he came from. There's no real evidence of parents or siblings or anything. I don't know whether they were sort of killed just after he was born, or whether they were just never really there or anything. Nobody knows that. He doesn't know that. And yeah, it does make him a very independent person, because if you don't have anything to rely on, then what else happens, really? And Womo is actually the same here. He was born around the time of the downfall, so I suspect that has a lot to do with things. I suspect at one point he probably did have a family that he just doesn't remember that were probably killed in, the whole genocide thing. So that's probably the deal there, but I can't say for sure because he doesn't know. And I don't know that there'd be a way to trace that because of, the whole genocide thing. Another couple of characters it's worth mentioning on this one are Isamu and Jiro for... how do I do this without spoilers? Because Jiro did have a family at one point that he does somewhat remember. There are definite parents there, and I'm pretty sure there's at least a sibling there, quite possibly 3 or 4. But there's no real evidence of that within who he is. He very much is independent and a loner, and it's possible that he's not a blood relative of that family. It's possible that he was somewhat adopted, but they don't have a relationship anymore. That much is expressly clear, that there's no relationship there. I don't know how much of a relationship there ever was. I don't know whether he was a blood relative. I suspect the answer to that is no. I don't think he was necessarily adopted. It might be sort of the aunt's child that, okay, we can't just let this kid go into some really crowded, crappy orphanage. Maybe they didn't have room for him originally. So it's okay, I guess we'll take this one in, but yeah, there's something very odd with that I don't fully know yet. And this is something that will probably be revisited on the podcast in the future at some point. Isamu, oh boy, how do I do this without spoilers? He has questions about his family, because he has very fleeting moments, very rarely, where he has memories from being a very small child of... He does have memories of some kind of family, though not enough to even determine if both parents were there, or if there were siblings, how many, there's no clarity there. But he doesn't properly remember a time before being raised in an orphanage, is the deal. So, again, there's Was that just when he was little more than a baby, or did it go on for a bit longer? What's the deal there? I mean, when he ended up at the orphanage, he didn't come there with a surname. So going on to the blood family thread, with characters that have no family is a little bit odd, because I did talk about one already, so I'm not gonna mention that. But Jiro versus Isamu, because they have similarities in the sense of remembering a family, and Jiro was definitely raised by one, at least to an extent, whereas Isamu wasn't. They have similarities, but also their differences. I mean, the big difference between them is that Isamu doesn't have found family. He has never really strived to make that a thing at all. I don't know that he really has an understanding of family that much. Whereas Jiro does have that and does want that. His is it's hard to define exactly who's in his without spending more time with him, and he's scary, but he does definitely aim for that and does definitely have that and gets a lot out of having that. But I think that's probably about all I have for this episode, at least for now. I do think this is a topic that will probably be revisited when I end up writing things that are a bit later in the timeline, instead of, just wistfully staring off into the distance about them and wishing I could get on that with, prior knowledge and all of that. I need that first. So let's move on to the things I always say at the end of the episodes for those who are new or still on the fence about a couple of things. If you are published or well on the way, please do get in touch via email, please. jade42black@gmail.com. Indie and self-pub are the people I want to hear from the most. If you're trad pub, that doesn't necessarily mean I won't talk to you, though. It's worth mentioning, I write adult, but I'm more than happy to talk about other age categories, and whatever genre, whatever length of book. It can be big, it can be novellas. I'd really like to talk to people who write novellas and short story collections and all kinds of things, really. If it's something you want to talk about, bring it over and let's see what we can figure out. That said, in your initial contact, there is a list of stuff I want to know in the description. Please read that first, because I don't want to give automatic no's if and when I get inundated. That is really the long and short of it, to make sure you do that. If you want to find me elsewhere, if you're looking for the home of the podcast, which you probably are, that is Instagram, jade_black21 on there. You'll get advance notice of the episode that week is. You'll also get little Sandboy teaser reels and a few other things as I play with them. And you'll probably also get some early pictures of artwork and things I've been working on. That's something I'm looking at doing at the moment. By the time this episode goes up, that may or may not be a thing. You'll have to follow me on Instagram and see. Look at that. If you're looking to know more about my writing, Twitter's really the place for that. I'm jadeblack21 on there. But for now, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so you don't miss future content. Copyright Jade Blank 2023.